The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm very excited to welcome for the first time on the show our autism expert this morning. It's Julie Mominee. And Julie, we're so thrilled that you're on the show this morning.
Yeah, I'm thrilled as well. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about what your role is at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders.
So I am the clinical manager for 3 different centers in the Orange County area. And essentially, I assist with, overseeing the clinical services and ensuring that there's clinical quality with the ABA programs. And then I also assist with just the day-to-day operations of the centers as well.
Well, that's phenomenal. And so you've joined us today and we've sent you some questions over. I'm going to jump right into the first question here. Hello, ladies. My son is 6, has therapy, was doing great. The last 2 months, he's been very whiny and overly extreme tantrums. Before we used to get them under control, but now anything triggers it. Why does it seem like he is going backwards? Didn't change anything in the environment or diet. Also, he seeks negative attention. How can we stop that? We ignore it. Do you have any other suggestions? And they send their love. So what would you say to that mom, Julie?
Sure. So increases or changes in behavior can occur for a variety of different reasons. So we would first want to take a look at whether or not the behavior intervention plans are being implemented with accuracy and consistency. So before we would make any changes to how we're managing the behavior, we want to make sure that the intervention is being implemented with the technicians that are working with the child, as well as being carried over by, all those interacting with the child. So this would include, parents as well, or, others interacting with the child in different settings, such as school or the community. So you'd first want to make sure that the strategies are being done the way that they should be being done. The second thing we might want to consider is whether or not the function or why the behavior is happening has changed. So anytime we create an intervention plan, we determine why the behavior is happening, and that basically controls how we manage the behavior. So if we have an action plan for tantrum behavior in which the child is looking to escape or avoid a situation, and that's actually not why the child is engaging in the behavior anymore, then we would want to make sure that we modify the strategies that we're using so that it connects to the function of the behavior. The second thing, too, is I know the mom had mentioned that there had been no changes in environment. So we may want to consider, there may not be a change in the home environment, but maybe there's a change in the school environment or an extracurricular activity environment. So at that point, we would want to take a look at all those different settings to ensure that there's no changes. And something that we consider a change, we may not notice, but can affect behavior. So it could be a change in, a schedule. It could be a change in a team member, a change change in diet or medication or sleep patterns. So we want to make sure that we assess all of those factors. Another thing to consider too is when the treatment program progresses and the curriculum gets more difficult, we may see an increase in behavior just because the child is being challenged. So at that point, we would want to make sure that we are actively teaching coping strategies and the replacement behaviors. So teaching the child to appropriately get what they want by appropriate means. So usually we would be teaching communication because that is a significant deficit area for those diagnosed with autism. So we would want to make sure that we were actively teaching skills in communication so the child can better cope with the treatment. And then in regards to the question about negative attention seeking, again, we would want to assess whether or not the intervention plan is being conducted the way that it should be. So there are different parts of an intervention. There are what we call antecedent modifications or preventative strategies. So things that we're doing in the environment to prevent the behavior from happening at all. And then we would also be actively teaching the replacement behavior, or, in this case, if it's negative attention seeking, the function is most likely because the child wants attention. So we want to make sure that we are teaching the child how to get others' attentions by, saying, hey, look at me, or check me out, or, appropriate ways of being silly, because oftentimes, children on the spectrum have a difficult time picking up humor and being able to identify, how others are perceiving them. So sometimes they may think that they're being silly or funny, but they're actually, maybe annoying somebody. So, just kind of teaching them how to, be a kid and be silly in appropriate ways. And then, of course, if they are engaging in problem behaviors to get some sort of negative attention, you definitely don't want to provide attention when those behaviors occur. So attention can be vocal attention, saying don't do that, or that's not funny, or, making eye contact, or, reacting with your body language or your facial expressions. So all of those things should be very neutral so that there's no reaction to the behavior. So
that's a lot.
Anyway.
That's a lot. That's a lot, Julie, and that's really helpful. But keeping in mind that a lot of times parents go, well, nothing changed. That thing you said, nothing changed. But somewhere something changed. And you really got to put on your sleuth hat to figure out where something changed. And it could be something positive. It could be something that the child experienced as being negative. It could be so many different things. But you got to figure out where that loop is. There was a period of time in which my son started hitting out of nowhere, and we were like, what happened? And I said, nothing changed, nothing's going on. And they said, somebody is allowing this behavior. And I was like, no, it's not happening. It's in your mind. It's not happening. And then I was in a meeting with the OT, and she said how he was hitting her every single day. And I said, what are you doing? And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, are you blocking it? Is there a consequence? Is there any? And she was like, oh, it just happens. And, once we taught her what to do about that, the hitting magically went away. So just make sure that you're listening to Julie and following up on things. I'm going to ask Trayvon if we can take a really quick, short break. We just have to adjust something, and then we want to come back to you, Julie. Do you mind hanging on 1 second?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, Trayvon, have we got a really short break we can go to? Okay, we're going to take one short break. Don't go anywhere, and we're going to be right back. Then the next question, Aimee, is that it says, thank you for your show. My son is 8. He was diagnosed at 4. Things are going well, but not on back and forth conversation. He tends to monologue, and if I attempt to stop him, he shuts down and won't talk. What can I do?
Okay, good question. So I would start by making sure that your son understands expectations for what a back and forth conversation looks like. So first of all, does he understand that expectation is to take turns? You say something, I say something, we go back and forth. You want to make sure that he knows what the expectations are, right? Because no one's going to be successful unless they kind of have guidelines for what they're supposed to do. And then what you could do is you could use some sort of visual to make this a little bit more concrete for him. So each time someone says something, they put a block on a tower, or you trade like a talking stick back and forth when it's your turn to talk. Something that makes it clear for him that he understands that there is an element of turn taking within conversation, right? And then it might help to start with preferred topics. Pick something to talk about that he likes, so that he's going to want to talk about it, rather than trying to start off by picking something he doesn't care as much about, or what he did at school that day. Those things, while we might be interested in them, those might not be the most interesting thing to your 8-year-old. So I would start with talking about something that he's interested in, so that the motivation is already there. And then after he's doing well with that, you can expand out to maybe other topics of conversation that aren't his favorite thing to talk about. So those are just some tips for kind of getting started. And then, there's so much that goes into conversational skills. So much. But this is a good place to start in terms of making sure that he understands that there should be an element of taking turns with that.
What fabulous, fabulous advice, because I know a lot of people struggle with this. So, Aimee, thank you so much for being with us and providing these fabulous answers. Getting to have a wonderful expert like yourself to help fill in these gaps for parents is such a pleasure. Again, you are in, which of the San Antonio offices are you in?
I spend half my time at the San Antonio office and half my time at the Helotes office.
There we go. Okay, I knew it had a fun name, Helotes. So thank you on behalf of your parents that you work with and the supervisors and the families that you work with. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And will you please say hello to everybody there, especially to Oscar, who I ran off the phone very quickly to get you on the phone. But hug him for him, because Oscar is another part of the magic, just like you are down there, because if you are a Texas family and you have gotten to meet Oscar, then you know what I'm talking about. So thank you all for all the work that you do. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Shannon. I've been a fan of your show for a really long time, so it's a pleasure to get to be on.
Yay. Well, we're going to have you back when we can have picture and sound.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Aimee.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Oh, she's so wonderful. I love the talent that we have. I'm still riding high on the fact that I just came back from visiting some of our offices and just seeing all the amazing, talented people that get to work with our kids. It's just it makes me feel whole. In any case, we're a little bit caught up now, so we're going to take a break, and we are going to get Bonnie Yates on with us, and she's going to be answering more of your questions, so stick with us. Moving on to the next question, my teenage daughter is autistic. We are trying to teach her about hygiene and self-care. It's not going well. My husband is so fed up, he is suggesting that we just let her not take a bath until she's so uncomfortable she decides to do it for herself. I don't think that's a good idea. She goes to school, her teachers will think that we don't care. What do you suggest?
First thing I would look at here would be what's going to motivate her. Because a lot of teenagers, I mean, some of us too, we don't always like to do hygiene because, it takes time and maybe we don't see the benefit in it. So first we would want to look at what's going to motivate her, if anything, to do it. Because if she doesn't see the reason for it, then you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. We had a student that I worked with for a while who was 22, and same thing. She did not want to engage. She could do it. She just didn't want to. But she loved Starbucks and she loved playing dress up. And so what we would do is we would go to the gym and we would let her be kind of the aerobics instructor and tell us what to do. And we would do little things at the gym. And then we would say, you know, I really want to go get Starbucks, but man, we stink. We got to take a shower. And so we would go in the little individual showers and we would shower next to her. And then we would go to Starbucks for a treat. And that was the way we could get her buy-in of like, hey, we want to go to Starbucks, but people are going to look at us weird if we stink at Starbucks. So let's go to the gym, we'll do a little workout, and then we'll shower so we don't stink at Starbucks. And I've taken another approach of like, if you want to date, maybe we're too young for this, but the idea here is that you want to look at what's going to motivate that individual, because if she doesn't see a reason to shower, then she's not going to, and you're just going to, battle it out. But you could also give her a lot of choices. Like maybe you could get her a really cool smelling, take her to a store that has a lot of different smelling gels or bath salts. Let her pick something that she really enjoys. Let her pick, something special that she can do when she gets out of the shower, and just go with what is going to motivate that individual and how can we kind of get them on board. And even ask her, is there a certain part of it that you don't like? Some students will tell us, I don't like my eyes getting wet. Oh, we can, maybe we can do something about that. Or I don't like the soap, so maybe we can use shower gel instead, or things like that. So I would look at those options.
I love that.
Okay, very good.
Welcome back to Autism Live. We're really excited. For the first time on the show, we're welcoming David Scribner. David, am I saying your last name right?
Yep, that's me, David Scribner.
Okay. And David, tell us, we've got a really fun picture of you with your thumbs up because we weren't able to get a picture today. But thrilled that you're here with us. Tell us what your role is at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders.
I am a senior clinical lead manager, so I'm in charge of running 3 offices. I'm currently running our Santa Ana office, our Irvine North office, and our Anaheim office, all in California.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know you're doing a great job doing that. So David is going to be answering some questions that you guys sent in for us. This is the segment that we call Ask an Autism Expert. And so David, I'm going to launch right in. Somebody said, thank you for the show. My son covers his ears when he hears loud noises and when he's doing something bad, and I'm redirecting him. When I call him, he covers his ears. What should I do? Please help.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty common thing that we kind of see with some of our earlier learners and our younger clients. I would look at this in 2 parts. For the covering his ears when he hears loud noises, the first thing I would want to do is make sure that we ruled out any kind of biomedical issues. I'd have him go in, get his hearing tested, and make sure that there isn't anything going on there. Once that was ruled out, then we have a little bit more of a direction that we can go to. We can also look into maybe seeing if he needs to have a occupational therapy referral to see if there's some sort of sensory issue there that they might be able to kind of handle and take a look at. And once we got that ruled out, the thing I would start looking at is the behavioral aspect of it. I think it's pretty telling that he's covering his ears when you're redirecting him. I would continue to follow through with that redirection. You don't want him to escape redirection just because he's able to block you out. And so we might need to do some other redirections rather than verbal redirections.
Can you give us like an example of what a verbal redirection would be, David?
Yeah, so do we have an idea of what the behavior is that they're redirecting?
I don't actually know
okay.
that.
No, that's okay. So, I mean, I'm going to use some examples then. So, if we had a client that was maybe laying down or playing with a toy inappropriately, getting some visual stimulation from it or something like that, where you're giving some sort of a verbal command to do something different than what that behavior is at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think, it's a pretty good strategy to just block that out, right? If you're the kid, I can't hear you, and I can't do it. So,
Well, it's equivalent to when we see on sitcoms and movies when somebody puts their fingers in their ears when somebody's saying something they don't want to hear and going la 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 la. It's if I don't really want to hear criticism either, and if I could cover my ears and not hear it, it would be a very adolescent thing to do. But if it worked, why wouldn't an adolescent do it?
Exactly.
So,
and that's the big takeaway there is that we just have to make sure that doesn't work anymore. So if our end goal is to redirect them away from that behavior, we just need to ramp up and use a different redirection. Whether it's if they're playing with the toy inappropriately, we take that toy away until that they're playing with it appropriately, and then they can have it back. If it's something that they're doing with their hands, directing their hands back down to their lap or something along those lines. And just figuring out something that we can do to get that behavior to stop without allowing our child or our client to keep doing those things. Now, the other thing, though,
what I just got that you said, I just had like an epiphany, because a lot of times as a parent, they'll be doing something that we don't want them to do, so we verbally try to redirect them. And in the case of the child covering the ears or child who just doesn't do it, what it turns into in that moment, I just realized this, is that as a parent, we then become affronted that they're not listening to us, and the thing that becomes most important is the redirection instead of the fact that we were trying to get them to stop a behavior. And in doing that, the kids got away with it. I just got that, David. You just made my light bulbs light up. But what we need to focus on is that we're trying to stop the behavior, not necessarily listen to the redirection. I had an aha moment. Thank you. I'm sorry.
No, that's exactly it, too. I'm assuming that we're talking about automatically reinforced behavior, and I think it's really easy to really miss what automatic means. Automatic reinforcement means that if you do it, it is reinforced.
Yeah.
And so that is the big takeaway.
Okay.
I did want to mention something else about this one too, real quick.
Yeah.
The caller also had mentioned that they would constantly plug their ears anytime they said their name as well.
Yes.
This will happen a lot when we're teaching certain skills. And we want to be really careful when we're teaching things like responding to name and eye contact and stuff like that, that we're pairing with something really fun and reinforcing, because kids do a really good job of learning that we use their name when we want something from them. And so they get really, really used to that. And so a good way to, really successful way for them to ignore or get out of doing work is to ignore their name when it's said. So initially what we want to do when we're teaching these things is to pair that with a lot of reinforcement. So we say their name, they look at us, and then we give them tickles, we give them high fives, we give them something that they really want. And then they kind of learn, my name isn't always necessarily mean I have to do work. I can mean good stuff too.
Got it. What an important
point. And then we can
point.
fade into doing more work.
So make sure that, just saying their name isn't always something that precedes something that's hard or difficult or not necessarily reinforcing. To make sure that when we say their name and they respond, that we're reinforcing them. I love that. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the last question here. My daughter is 4. We are card clients and she's making great progress. My question is, how can I get my husband to learn what the therapists are doing? It's not that he doesn't care, he just doesn't know what to do, and when I try to teach him, he doesn't get it. And I'm going to guess, too, that creates friction between mom and dad when mom's trying to train dad. So what do you recommend, Gabe?
A number of things. We have a parent support program. It's part of the CARD model. So not only do we have our clinics and the therapy that your child should attend, but optimally, obviously we require at least one parent, but it would be so great if both parents were attending all parent meetings. And I like to call them parent meetings because a lot of times they get, labeled as parent trainings. But yeah, in this situation, Dad could probably benefit from a parent meeting where maybe we really worked on the behavior interventions that, we have currently in place for her daughter, and really allow the BCBA on their team to be the one that articulates that information to Dad, maybe models and demonstrates some of that information, because Mom's probably in the process of still learning as well. So it'd be great if both parents got to attend together. It could be an opportunity for them to really, become more aligned on the treatment for their daughter, and really understanding what's happening there. And yeah, you're right. It would allow for Mom to maybe not have to be in the position that she's in currently, which is disseminating all of that information to Dad when she's trying to absorb it and understand it herself as well.
Yeah, when we found out about CARD, we found out from another family. They recommended CARD to us, and really were our Eskimos coming to CARD. And one of the first things that the mom said was, you're going to have a clinic, and you need to attend that clinic like it's the most important thing in your world. You're going to rearrange your entire life around going to that clinic. And she said, oh, and by the way, it's not just for you to go. Your husband has to get off of work to go. And she said, federal law provides for, your employer has to let you out for it. I know none of us wants to do that. None of us wants to go to the employer and say, hey, once a month, I'm going to have to take this, part of this morning off for the next year to 2 to 3 to, it was 5 years in our case. Nobody wants to go to the employer and say that, but the truth is you're protected, that they cannot fire you over that. They cannot pass you up for promotion over that. It's law. So know that, but I think back now about how much, because this mom said before we even started, and she said, this is what you have to do if you want to be successful. That was then what we did. And I met people along the way, I still meet parents who are like, yeah, but we just can't. And I know I would have said that, Gabe. I know I would have said that, but this mom said to me, no. Rearrange your life, prioritize that. You both need to be there. And even with both of us there, I learned things faster because I was at home more. I was working from home. And at a certain point, my husband came to me and said, I don't get it. Why does he do this for Peter? And why does he do this for this therapist? And he does it for you, but he doesn't do it for me. And I was not very generous at that point. I said to my husband, well, you better learn this. You better pay attention. You better get on the bandwagon. But we had a great supervisor who said to me, you need to not be there some of the times so that Dad is the only person, because I'm such a strong personality that I would always jump in. And she said, you need to be unavailable. You need to go shopping or something. But I think back all the time, Gabe, on that, and think, my husband and my son are so close. They have such a good relationship, and it's because he learned how to do what the therapist did. So I appreciate that you're telling them that they both should go to these clinics, that it's important.
And ultimately, even if for whatever reason there's some sort of other additional barriers, reach out to your supervisor. See what the supervisor can do in terms of accommodating schedules. Maybe we can create additional time that's outside of the working time. It can be challenging, and maybe there's some times where Dad can get off work a little bit early, and that supervisor can be available for a parent training in the evening. I can't make promises for any particular supervisor, and it ultimately comes down to just that old saying, hey, my mom always said all you can do is ask.
That's right.
And so where there's a will, there's a way. And if your husband is interested and cares, then just ask and see what kind of accommodations can be made.
Absolutely. Don't give up on your husband. Pull him into this, because it will make a difference. Gabe, you've been fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And for those of you who are in a place where CARD is starting to come to, maybe you'll get to meet Gabe in your travels. And we'll look forward to having you back again on the show, Gabe.
Sounds good, Shannon.
All right, you take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye. Welcome back to Autism Live. We have joining us on the phone right now, Krystal Fountaine. This is one of my favorite segments. This is when we welcome an autism expert to be with us and answer some of your questions. So Krystal, this is your first time on the show, and we've had a little bit of technical difficulty, but we've got you on the phone now. Welcome.
Hi, good morning.
We're thrilled to have you here. Please tell our audience what your role is at CARD and what you do.
Thank you. I'm very pleased and happy to be here. I am a regional manager for the whole state of Washington. So I currently oversee about 6 centers and a few expansion sites out here.
And you do a wonderful job, and I know your families up there just so appreciate you, as do I. Thank you so much for all the great work that you do. So I'm going to launch right in here to some questions. My daughter, 7, with ASD, has recently started repeating her responses by whispering them under her breath. So if I ask her, what do you want, juice or milk, she will respond, I want juice, but then she will whisper, want juice. Is this echolalia, and should I ignore it or address it?
Okay, so based off of what you're describing, it does sound like it is echolalia. And while it's always best to address some of these extraneous behaviors, it's something that I think that can be easily shaped. And you can do this by having her describe how she feels about getting the juice, or even by describing what the juice tastes like. So my thoughts are, for example, when she responds with, I want juice, and then while you're pouring it, to break up that pattern in that language, you can say something like, I love juice, or I'm so thirsty, or you can even say something like, my favorite juice is apple juice, and that'll break up that echolalia that you're describing.
Wonderful.
And this will help with more, this will help model more functional language and communication. And I think a key here is to generalize it into other activities in her daily routine. And you can do this by joining her in play and say, for example, if she's playing with dolls or cars, you can say things like, the doll's sleepy, it's time for bed, or the car's moving really fast. And the biggest thing here is just to make sure that you're reinforcing the variety of language, because this will help increase that in the future.
Okay, so we're trying to get in between, because she says, I want juice, and then she repeats the want juice. We're trying to just sort of interrupt that there by feeding words from ourselves, saying, I love juice, or my favorite juice is apple juice, what is yours? So we're just trying to interrupt that pattern?
Absolutely, because it sounds like she's saying I want juice and then immediately going to echo that. So it sounds like she has really good imitation, and she's imitating things that she's hearing. So if we're just being proactive in throwing in some of those variety of phrases, then she's going to be imitating our language as well.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I'm going to move on to the Okay, the last question. Hello, I suspect my daughter, 13 months old, is on the spectrum. We are in a parent-led intervention program and will be enrolling in CARD at the end of the year. My question is in regard to regression. New data exists that suggests regression is more common than previously thought. That said, how common is regression observed in children who are in the middle of their treatment? Does therapy help offset whatever that means? Regression. So 13-month-old, but I think when they said starting at the end of the year, I think this is a question that came in at the end of December. So maybe they've already started, but is regression while in therapy common, I think, is the core of this.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm really excited that the child will be enrolling in an ABA program. That is the best thing to do, and I highly recommend that. In regards to regression, approximately 1/3 of children diagnosed with autism experience or reportedly lose skills within the first 3 years of life. And unfortunately, the exact cause of that is unknown at this time. In regards to ABA and regression in ABA, first of all, ABA is proven to increase skill progression and acquisition. So in turn, if you are actively working on teaching skills, it's less likely or may lead to a reduced chance of regression. And sometimes we do experience potential regression in a treatment program, which could be, again, due to a variety of different factors. So one, we would want to make sure that, maintenance procedures are in place in the program. So that means that we have a plan to practice skills that are taught continuously and in the natural environment so that they're maintained. Children and, essentially all individuals lose skills that they don't actively practice on a daily basis. So, as part of the program, we need to have maintenance procedures in place to prevent that loss of skills. So the second part of it, too, is ensuring that you have generalization procedures in place so that you are teaching skills across different environments or settings, such as the home environment, the school environment, the community environment, and you're also teaching them with different people. So, the skill is being taught with the behavior technician in a structured ABA setting, but it's also being taught, in a natural setting with the parent. Additionally, you want to make sure that you're using different materials when you're teaching a skill so that they don't learn this just one way to do the skill. So that's something to consider as well. So in summary, it would be important to have maintenance and generalization procedures in place to prevent regression in the first place.
Thank you so much. My son regressed into autism, and when we started ABA, I was so grateful that we were starting to get him caught up, but I never ever could get over the fear that he was going to regress again. And there were times when he would master a skill and then they would check it in maintenance and they would see that he hadn't maintained it and they would brush him up on it again. So he never ever was able to backslide for very far at all because we just kept up on things and on top of it, but I never got over the fear of it. I still have a fear that at some point he will regress. And he can wake up in the morning and be a little out of it, and I have fear. I'm like, oh no, what is this? So I hear the fear from this parent, and I just want to say that the fear is one thing, right? And I like to remind everybody, fear is false evidence appearing real. But if you're in there doing the ABA, good things happen. And your child, if it's a good ABA provider, your child isn't allowed to regress because they keep those skills up. So, Julie, thank you so much for being with us and for answering these questions. We really appreciate your expertise today.
Thank you so much for having me, and anytime.
Well, we will look forward to having you back on the show sometime. You have a great weekend. My 14-year-old son had years of ABA therapy and is doing really well. The only problem is mornings. He moves so slow, goes back to bed, falls asleep in the shower, and makes us all late. I have tried so many ways to motivate him to get up and get moving, but nothing works, and he will say, "Stop trying to ABA me." I feel like that's a familiar thing. I don't know how much of this is just him being a teen, but it's making us all nuts, and what do you suggest? I can't wait to hear this because we have some of these same problems.
Well, I think my gut instinct is to say definitely get an appointment scheduled with your primary care physician, because we just want to make sure that we rule out any type of possible medical components that could be contributing to his struggles with waking up in the morning. We just want to make sure that your son is healthy. And if all works out, I'm thinking that you definitely have got a true teenager on your hands. between the ages of like 14 and 17, teenagers require like an average of 10 hours of sleep. And it sounds crazy and it sounds like a lot of sleep, but their body's still developing in their brain, and so they do require more. And I think the best thing to look at is looking at the sleep routine in general, looking at what time your son's going to bed, and making sure that it's enough time so that he does get all the sleep that he needs. And when you start looking at that, I always recommend my families to get something like a sleep log, and I just I have the families jot down notes about what time they go to bed. Sometimes there's certain foods that you eat before bedtime that will keep you up and restless during the night, or drinking before bed, having too much water, having your tummy full, and digesting food. And so there's like so much to that. So I would start off with getting a log so that you can start looking at the patterns with his struggles in getting up in the morning.
I love that, because I wouldn't have occurred to me to make sure that there isn't some medical thing that's happening. So love that advice. And I didn't know that teenagers needed 10 hours of sleep. I think the most my son ever gets is 8, and he's always dragging. I'm going to tell him, I'm going to cut that little part out that you just said and play that for him and say it's got to be 10 hours. Expect to not be on his Christmas card list because he wants to stay up late. So the last question, can you help with awareness of streets and parking lots for 17-year-old? A 17-year-old that can only focus on one thing at a time. What do you say to that parent, David?
So this is, I really want to know a lot of background on this particular situation. So I'm going to give a little bit of a multifaceted response, I hope.
Okay.
One of the things that we're looking at here is that they're 17 years old, so they're a little bit older. So I'd be curious to see how much services they're receiving. If they are receiving ABA, then this is something that we really should be working on. We should be targeting this, and we should be getting as much practice in as possible. One of the issues with things like crossing the street, parking lot safety, or any real safety type skill in general is we don't really have that opportunity for a learning history. We know that if we step into the street, we're going to get hit by a car. But depending on where our learner is, they don't have the language that we can conceptualize that for them. Then it's kind of just an arbitrary thing for them. We're walking up to the street, and then we're doing this little ritual thing, and then we cross the street. And then they're not really pairing that with the fact that the reason we're doing that is because we're making sure that a car isn't coming. So what we want to do in that situation, if we can't conceptualize that, we want to kind of move into teaching this as more of a rule-based thing. And this just becomes the routine. So that we can have a lot of success for teaching things like brushing teeth and taking a shower because we turn it into a routine. And this is what the routine is, and this is how I do it. And then once we get that routine really, really established, whether or not we understand why we're doing the routine, we still have that routine taught, and we're using that. So we kind of need to do the same thing with crossing the street and parking lot safety, where we just really, really teach that. Now, the problem is we also don't want a learner to look one way, look the other way. There's cars coming, and I cross the street anyways, right? We really want to teach that part of it. If the car is coming, then we stop. And so the only way to do that is to really, really, really practice lots of different times. I would start with the streets and the parking lot. I would start with the street that we have to cross the most often. I would start with that street, and I would start with the parking lot that we're going to be in the most often, and really, really identify what skills I want to teach, looking both ways, stopping when cars are coming, continuing to look while I'm crossing the street. And I would try to practice that during an off hour, if I could too. Maybe practice it earlier in the morning or later in the evening when we don't have a lot of cars. And then once we get those skills that we're looking for well established, then moving into it when it's slightly busier. And continuing for it that way. But once we do teach it in those two locations, in that one parking lot that we're always in, and that one street that we're always crossing, we're still in other parking lots. So we're going to want to move to a new parking lot, and we're going to want to move to a new street, and we're going to want to keep doing that over and over and over again. We don't want to assume that this skill is just going to generalize. We want to really give them a lot of opportunities to practice this across many different environments and never really assume generalization, because this is a really big safety concern.
Yes, and I appreciate everything that you just said, because this is so important for parents. We forget that, you know, even if you were teaching this to somebody who was neurotypical, it would take a while, and there would be multiple opportunities, and that you would continue to worry about them, and make sure and prompt and do things for years and years and years. And when we, you know, it may be that we didn't get to this or until the person is 17, but it's still going to take hundreds and hundreds of trials, and you got to be patient and give them all that opportunity in safe ways that David was talking about. Or it may be that this person, you know, sometimes a skill with a neurotypical child will take 100 trials, but with our kids it takes 2,000. But when it's a safety issue, we just want to keep working on it, because it's a safety issue. I mean, it sort of speaks to itself. So, David, I appreciate all of your answers. Thank you so much for everything that you do for our families and for taking the time away to be with us this morning and answer these questions in such a thoughtful and considerate way. We really appreciate you.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us again. We are here with Julie Mominee. What a great name, first of all. And she is our autism expert for the day. She is the senior clinical lead manager in Southern California in a pocket of offices. Which offices did you say again, Julie?
The Cypress, Garden Grove, and Santa Fe Springs offices.
Wonderful. I love those offices. So Julie's answering your questions. This next one is, hello, I'm a special education teacher on my lunch break. How can I get a parent on board with our behavior plan for her son? He's in 7th grade. Mom reports there are no behaviors at home. At school, he has several, and I know that mom and dad tiptoe around him and don't ask him to do anything because demands are a trigger. He runs the house. He's 12. How do I get mom to see that her behavior plays a part in her son's behavior and that it needs to change? It seems almost impossible, but I know that you will have ideas, and thanks. We're all on the front of our seats to hear what you have to say to that, Julie.
Yeah, this is a great question and something that we commonly deal with as clinicians and teachers working with individuals with autism. And, you know, consistency is one of the most important things when it comes to behavior change. So if an intervention is not being implemented with consistency across environments and across people, you're not going to see the progress that you may see if there was consistency. So a couple of things. When I work with parents on implementing an intervention, I first assess whether that intervention is practical for the home setting. So maybe like what you're able to do in the classroom with maybe additional support or aids in the classroom, the family may not be able to implement the same type of strategy because maybe they just don't have additional support at home. Especially if they have been conditioned to essentially give in to the behavior in effort to avoid one more behavior battle with their child. You know, an intervention can seem overwhelming. So first you want to make sure that the intervention can be done in the home setting. And then also, you know, to simplify it, you know, put it in terms where the family can understand what the strategies mean. When we use or create interventions, sometimes we use behavioral jargon. So when we communicate the strategies to parents, we need to make sure to put them in layman's terms or use examples in everyday life for it to make sense, which in turn will make it easier for them to implement with accuracy. So can seem overwhelming, especially maybe they have, some fear of the behavior that might happen if they do follow through with something. So, if they're not able to implement all parts of the intervention, are there a few things that they can start with and be successful with? So that could be, choosing a couple of antecedent modifications or preventative strategies like transition warnings, letting them know that something's going to take place or that they're going to be asked to do something that maybe they don't want to do. Or, maybe it could be a schedule, at home of the activities that, the child will be engaging in for that day. Or, focus on reinforcing appropriate behavior and start there, because that's going to be easier than, maybe following through with a task demand. So, just finding out ways that maybe they can be more successful. And then the other part of it too is, and I don't know how often you're able to have communication with the family, because I know as a special education teacher, you're very busy, and so you may not have the one-to-one time with the family to build rapport. But if you do, I would recommend setting up consistent, weekly or even monthly check-ins with the family to see how things are going, seeing how you can support them in the school environment, see if they have any questions about the interventions. And in some cases, I have worked with teachers that do home observation. So I don't know if that's an option, because, building rapport and trust with the family, it's more likely that they are going to, take what you say more seriously and see how it's going to benefit their child. And that's another thing too, is, it's important to have an open conversation with the family about their priorities and what their goals are for their child, and then tie in what you're doing in the classroom setting that is going to help their child get to where you want them to be. And if you're able to make that connection, it's more likely that they're going to be on board with your intervention.
I love that answer. I love that answer, because if it's not something that's important to us, we're going to be less likely to work on it. If we don't know how to implement the strategy, it's not going to happen. If we are afraid, even if we know how to implement the strategy, but we don't know how to deal with the consequence of it, the behavior that comes back, we're only going to do it once. All of those things get in the way of a parent participating, and making it easy, making it clear, keeping the jargon at a minimum. You're hitting all the right buttons here. We appreciate that.